Hey Internet Kids, Docalriv here, and I want to do a quick Witch Doctor guide for you today for the newly released game, Diablo 3. And one of the things I want to go over today is just some basics, primary and secondary skills, passive skills, and your action bar skills. I want to go over a couple different key points, why I use what I use in my build, and how I play the build that I use, and you'll see some gameplay footage of that. Alright, first and foremost, for my primary skill slot, which is your left click button on your mouse, I use Poison Dart. Now there's a lot of choices here, but I like Poison Dart because it opens up a very specific rune that I like, and that's Spined Dart. Spined Dart gains you 24 mana every time a Poison Dart hits an enemy. Now the build that I'm using is more of a run-in, soul harvest, and run-away build. Now once you've run away, the build is pretty mana intensive. So I like to have Spined Dart because it allows me to regain some of that mana I'm using by having such a mana intensive build. Alright, for my secondary skill, I use Grasp of the Dead. Grasp of the Dead costs 122 mana and has an 8-second cooldown. What it does is, ghoulish hands reach out from the ground, slowing enemy movement by 60% and dealing 20% weapon damage as physical for 8 seconds. And the rune that I use for this one is Unbreakable Grasp. The other rune that I've played around with is Death is Life. And what this rune does is enemies who die while in the area of Grasp of the Dead have a 5% chance to produce a health globe. Now health globes are great. They help you revive in combat, and if you can't make it away fast enough and you're able to AoE something to death, it's really nice to have a couple extra health globes every once in a while just to keep your survivability up. So this one's more of a personal choice. I do think that for this build, Grasp of the Dead is mandatory as a secondary skill. However, that being said, it's really up to you which rune you want to use. Me personally, I just use Unbreakable Grasp. Alright, now let's move on to our action bar skills. For your action bar skills, you have 1 through 4 as your hotkeys. If you unlock elective mode, which can be done through your game's menu, you can put any skill into any slot on this action bar. Me personally, I find a very useful action within each of the 4 different subcategories: defensive, terror, decay, and voodoo. So as a result, even though I have elective mode unlocked for other classes, in the Witch Doctor build that I'm using, you don't have to move things around too much. Alright, first off, let's talk about our defensive skill here. What I use is Spirit Walk. Spirit Walk costs 49 mana and has a 15-second cooldown. And what it does is it lets you leave your physical body and enter the Spirit Realm for 2 seconds. While in the Spirit Realm, your movement is unhindered. Your link to the Spirit Realm will end if your physical body sustains 50% of your maximum life and damage. The rune that I use for Spirit Walk is Severance. What Severance does is it allows you to damage enemies you walk through in spirit form for 100% weapon damage as physical. I use this in conjunction with Soul Harvest. Soul Harvest is my second action bar skill that I use. I have it hotkeyed to 2. It costs 59 mana and also has a cooldown of 15 seconds. What it does is it feeds on the life force of up to 5 enemies within 16 yards. At my level, you gain 130 intelligence for each affected enemy. This effect lasts for 30 seconds. So essentially what you're doing is you're stacking an intelligence buff for each enemy that you Soul Harvest, up to a total of 5. The intelligence buff that you get increases as you level, so it's a great scaling ability. The rune that I use on this is Siphon. However, I've had a lot of luck with other runes as well. Siphon allows you to gain 2171 life for every enemy harvested. Other runes that you can use for this build are Swallow Your Soul, which gains you 39 mana for every enemy harvested. However, for this specific build, it's not ideal because you're generally using Soul Harvest in the very beginning of your combat phase, so you don't always need mana right away like that. Realistically, you can't go wrong with any of the runes in this skill. I use Siphon for my build because it just gives you some quick life if you need it. I've also had a lot of luck with Soul to Waste, which increases the duration of Soul Harvest effect to 60 seconds. It's nice to not have to worry about rebuffing your Soul Harvest as often, which is why if you're trying to plow through content, Soul to Waste is a good leveling skill to have. Before I move on to my third hotkey, I just want to state that Soul Harvest is absolutely essential to this build, and in most instances is essential to any Witch Doctor build. It gives you such a giant damage increase that it's really hard to ignore. Alright, hotkey to my 3 button, I have Acid Cloud, and for runes, I have Acid Rain. Acid Cloud costs 172 mana, causing acid to rain down, dealing an initial 100% weapon damage as poison, followed by 75% weapon damage as poison over 3 seconds to enemies who remain in the area. Acid Rain increases the initial area of effective Acid Cloud to 24 yards. You can get into some of the other ones, but that increased AoE area is very essential and very key to bringing down a large amount of mobs very quickly, which keeps you alive. Alright, and finally for my 4 key, in my Voodoo slot, I have a Gargantuan. What Gargantuan is it costs 147 mana and has a 60-second cooldown. It summons a Gargantuan zombie to fight for you, and the Gargantuan attacks for 25% of your weapon damage as physical. Now, I go back and forth between Restless Giant and Big Stinker. Restless Giant, when the Gargantuan encounters an elite enemy or is near 5 enemies, it enrages for 15 seconds, gaining 20% movement speed, 35% attack speed, and 200% physical damage. This is great for when you come across those elite mobs, because sometimes your own damage, especially on vampiric mobs, just doesn't cut it. And this effect cannot occur more than once every 120 seconds. Elite enemies include champions, rares, bosses, and other players. I also like Big Stinker. This is a great AoE ability. The Gargantuan is surrounded by a poison cloud that deals 15% weapon damage as poison to nearby enemies. I normally have this rune active when I'm fighting trash mobs, but when I know I'm going to fight a boss, I switch over to Restless Giant because I find that it gives you a better DPS increase. Alright, those are the main skills that I use. Now for passive skills, this is pretty simple, and you can play around with these a little bit. However, for this build, what I found to be most effective was Jungle Fortitude, which reduces all damage taken by you and your pets by 20%. Once you start getting into Act 2, Act 3, Act 4 of Nightmare Mode, you are going to need Jungle Fortitude. Otherwise, you are simply going to get one-shotted, unless you are absolutely stacking resistance and you have a massive health pool. Spiritual Attunement is the second skill I use. This allows your maximum mana to increase by 20%, and it regenerates 1% of your maximum mana per second. Pierce the Veil. All of your damage is increased by 20%, but your mana costs are increased by 30%. These 3 passive skills, in conjunction with all the rest of the active, action bar skills, and your mouse skills, make for a pretty effective AoE build for trash mobs. And with some slight rune changes, this build works very well for bosses. Now let's get to how I play this build and some of the synergies between some of the skills I've picked. The main synergy here for mana regeneration is the synergy between Pierce the Veil and Poison Dart. Pierce the Veil makes your mana costs increase, so you're going to have some kind of mana regeneration ability. For us, that's Poison Dart with a Spine Dart rune. You're going to start off every group of trash mobs by walking into the middle, soul harvesting once you've surrounded by 5 mobs, which will greatly increase the damage you do. At that point, you're going to Spirit Walk. This is where Severance comes into play. Once you Spirit Walk, you can freely move through the mobs and out of the area. As you're doing so, you're damaging enemies. And once you come back to the physical realm, you're going to immediately start clicking 3 over the group of mobs. This is Acid Rain. I usually use Acid Rain as many times as I have to until I'm out of mana. Once you're out of mana, there's generally going to be 1 or 2 mobs left, whether they be elite mobs or just higher health mobs, that are still sticking around. If that's the case, this is the time to start spamming Poison Dart. You hit your shift button, that'll stop you in place, and you spam Poison Dart on the mob, and you will get mana back very quickly. This generally sets you up for success, and with the 15-second cooldown on Spirit Walk and Soul Harvest, as well as the 8-second cooldown on Grasp of the Dead, you can effectively manage additional mobs if you should pull 2 groups at a time. Grasp of the Dead is a great kind of oh shit button, which you can use to slow down mobs if you didn't Spirit Walk out in time, or if a second group of mobs is approaching you from the other side of the screen. Simply drop Grasp of the Dead on the ground, and start moving towards the weaker group of mobs that has already been severely damaged by Acid Rain and Poison Dart. Your Gargantuan's going to stay up most of the time. However, if he does die, it can be kind of stinky, because 60 seconds is a long cooldown for a pet that tanks for you. The last thing I want to talk about here is choice of followers. I personally use the Templar. He's supposed to tank for you, and in some instances he does so. In other instances he doesn't. However, one thing I've noticed is that no matter whether or not he's tanking for you, he does consistently heal you. Between picking up health globes and using Soul Harvest, your Templar generally keeps you topped off in most situations. Now, he's not going to be spamming heals on you, and he's not going to be the most effective tank in the world. However, he's a pretty good choice. Just give him a shield and a one-hander and a pretty good relic, and you've got a follower who's going to keep you alive when shit hits the fan. Well, that's it for the Witch Doctor Guide. I want to thank everybody for watching. Stay tuned and go on over to our Razor Naga free giveaway video if you're interested, and enter for a chance to win a free Razor Naga. Thanks for watching.